Robert Pearlman. I'm the editor of CollectSpace.com. It's my pleasure to host this, or to moderate this evening's panel on the 20th anniversary of the International Space Station. The reason why I asked to do this, and the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation were kind enough to allow, if you'll allow the shameless plug, 2 days ago we published, or I published with Smithsonian Press and Gary Kittmacher here at Johnson Space Center and our artist Ron Miller, a book called Space Stations, appropriate for this panel. Nicole Stott was very kind to offer the forward on our, for the book. Awesome. So please, if you want more information, we'll be at the show tomorrow. But you didn't come here to listen to me, so let me introduce our esteemed panel tonight. From my right here, we have Jim Wetherbee, a veteran of 6 space shuttle missions, 2 to the ISS. He brought home the Expedition 1 crew and delivered the Expedition 2 crew, and then later delivered the P1 truss, an extension to the backbone of the space station. We then have Nicole Stott, who flew twice to the International Space Station. She was a flight engineer on Expedition 20 and 21. She was aboard the space station for 91 days. And she was the first astronaut to paint with watercolors on the space station. Bill McArthur is a veteran of 4 space flights. He was on the 5th shuttle mission to visit and help construct the International Space Station, and then served as commander of Expedition 12, spending 190 days aboard the outpost. Soichi Noguchi from JAXA is, to date, he has 2 flights to the International Space Station, and he served as a flight engineer on Expedition 22-23 for 163 days. He is returning to the space station in 2019 as a member of the Expedition 61 and 62 crew. And Franklin Chang Diaz is one of 2 people to hold the record for 7 flights into space, the most of any human. He flew to the space station on his final flight and helped exchange the Expedition 4 crew for the Expedition 5. So the reason we're here tonight is because on November 20th will mark 20 years since the launch of the first component of the International Space Station, the Russian Zarya Functional Cargo Block, or FGB. 1 month later, on December 6, 1998, STS-8 docked or birthed the Unity node to Zarya, beginning a 2-decade legacy of international cooperation in space. And it just so happens that today is the 18-year anniversary of the first expedition crew moving on board the International Space Station, Bill Shepard, Yuri Gitsenko, and Sergei Krikalev. So to date, there have been 6,574 days when there hasn't been a human in space. That is 939 weeks and 1 day, or 567,993 hundredths and seconds. Or if there are anyone in our audience who is a teenager, there hasn't been a day in your life that there hasn't been an astronaut in space. So to kick it off and to go back 20 years, Bill, if you could tell us a little bit about, since you arrived at the space station before Expedition 1 arrived and then was there later, what was the nascent space station like?
It was pristine. And it looked big. It really looked big. I remember when I went outside on my first EVA, I was EV2 with Leroy Chow, and I remember on my back coming out and seeing the station soaring overhead above the airlock, and I said, "Oh my God, it's huge." And of course, it's tiny, but anyhow, it was just, it was just so impressive, and it was, as we were approaching it, it was, you know, the realization of science fiction. You know, here we are, you know, approaching another spaceship, and so we were really quite excited. It was a little challenging getting there. We had lost the K-band antenna before we got there, and so we didn't have the K-band radar data. We didn't have the rendezvous radar data, so we reverted to a lot of the manual techniques, and so we were really thrilled to get there. But crawling around on the outside, it was it really, you know, it was like a labyrinth. It was just really complicated, and it made us really glad that the training at the ground was so good. But inside, again, it was pretty cool, but it was sort of sterile, no pun intended. It was a little bit sterile. I mean, there was no one in there. We actually could only go into the Unity node, into the FGB. We weren't allowed into the service module. But we all took turns. We all rotated the few days we were docked so that we all got to sleep inside the node. And I made up my mind then that what I really wanted to do, instead of living in space, instead of visiting space, was to live in space. And so then, spring forward, golly, just only about 5 years, and then Valeria and I and Greg Olson got up there. The Expedition 13 crew was there. And remember how I said it looked kind of sterile before? No longer. It was chaos. You know, if you really like a very orderly life, don't go into space. It doesn't matter how meticulous you are about lining, you know, about folding your clothes and lining them up, they will not stay that way. And so it's really managing the clutter inside is really, really important. But don't get me wrong, it's just an absolute wonderful, it's a wonderful place to live. There's always something absolutely stimulating to do. Sometimes it was stimulating but frustrating, such as inventorying toothbrushes. You gotta know how many toothbrushes you have, right? Because that way the ground will know how many they need to send up. And so every once in a while you have to get caught up with the inventory, but it was just a wonderful experience. It just scratched every itch I had about going into space.
Let me ask a quick follow-up on that. In that, since you were there at the beginning and you were there later, I've heard that the ISS today has a very noticeable, very distinct smell. Did it have a new spacecraft smell when you first arrived?
It had virtually no odor at all. I think there would be some isolated odors. It's a space station, right? No, we didn't get a new shirt for every day, and so it was kind of a game. I had this special kind of new shirt that was impregnated with some some silver substance to kill odor. And so after wearing it to exercise for 30 days, it didn't smell bad, but it was like it was starch. but other things, you know, eventually they would get like all the gym clothes. They would start smelling like gym clothes, and if you put them right by an air conditioner vent, an air outlet, you could dry them out. If you went by there, you'd know that's where your gym clothes were. But for the most part, it wasn't. Now, there is a unique smell in space, and it's associated with EVA. And anyone who's done EVA or been around a crew member that's come in from an EVA, there is this sort of metallic smell that is very unique. It only lasts for a brief period of time, but it's something noticeable.
So, you came and went from the space station on your first mission, and on the first visit there, and Expedition 1 moved on board. Jim, you arrived to bring them home, but before you did, not only had they established a foothold of humanity on orbit, but they seem to have established, or Bill Shepard had established some customs that still last to this day. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, anytime humans are involved in any endeavor, we should always try to understand and appreciate. How about that? Anything we're passionate about, we should try to understand and appreciate the roots of how an organization was started. And so that's one of the reasons I love hearing the lectures this morning with the folks in the Mirror and the Skylab folks. We need to continue telling those stories, so thanks for having this panel about the space station. It's also why I was pretty happy when I first flew with Dan Brandenstein, and I learned that there's a custom of watching the movie Gun Begin before we launch into space. It's an interesting movie about the one man against the odds and the courage and the sacrifice. Unfortunately, the title character dies, but still, it's a pretty interesting custom. When I flew for the first time with the Russian cosmonaut, Volodya Titov, he said, all right, now you have to watch our movie, which, different story, but the same plot. It's very interesting. Deli Sons of Pustini, I guess it's called. It's unresolved as to whether or not that title character dies. But anyway, so Bill Shepard, as we were getting ready to launch on the space station, recognized the importance of having culture and traditions. And of course, the space station is analogous to a Navy ship flying on the really high seas. You're separated, you're isolated, it's austere conditions. There's a requirement or need for humans to have good morale and take care of each other, that kind of thing. And one of the things that you can do is to create culture and traditions. And so he wrote a culture manual, which I brought here today, just to share with you a couple of things that he had in it. It starts with the concept of the ship's bell, which is used for various ceremonial events on the station. You're never intended to use the bell for anything normal, like a call to dinner or anything like that. It was used for change of command ceremonies or arriving and departing spacecraft or visiting dignitaries, things like that. His intention is, someday we will deorbit the space station, but of course the bell will be brought back to the Earth and will symbolize the life of the space station and the people that were on it and the nations that contributed, that kind of thing. He also intended the culture and traditions to evolve over time, so we'll have to check and see if it's the same culture and traditions that are going on, but he fully expected that they would evolve, and that's okay. But when we started from Expedition 1, there's things like the quarterdeck, which is, again, analogous to a Navy ship where people first arrive, and that's where you post the flags of the nations, and of course the ISS commander has that flag of his or her country in a prominent position. When visitors arrive, they have, or different vehicles arrive with different numbers of bells that you ring, and you make an announcement. So plank owners is another cultural tradition that the originating crew members who first commissioned the vehicles, so in this case the three that Robert mentioned, are plank holders of the International Space Station. So when they arrive, for example, Sergei Krikalev arrives, there's an announcement, cosmonaut Sergei Konstantinovich Krikalev, plank owner, arriving, and then 8 bells, 4 groups of 2 separated by a pause. It's showing the honor of someone who was one of the originating members. For example, when we arrived, they would ring the bell and they'd say United States Atlantis arriving, and then 2 bells for visiting spacecraft view. Change of command ceremonies, of course, very formal event, and we follow certain protocols. There's generally the playing of the national anthem of the off-going ISS commander, remarks by the off-going ISS commander, and then the actual instantaneous change of command and authority and accountability, which occurs instantaneously when they say, the off-going commander says, I'm ready to be relieved. The oncoming commander says, I relieve you of command. And then the off-going commander must reply, I stand relieved. And command is immediately transferred at that moment. national anthem of the oncoming commander, and then the bell is rung. And then the last thing I'll mention, I think, is the logbook. Again, a pretty formal event where you make entries into the logbook to commemorate national holidays or things that the ISS commander specifies, arriving vehicles, departing vehicles. And there's another Navy tradition at 001 Zulu on the first day of the year, the logbook entry must be completed in rhyme. The visiting Uber driver, so I was the had to make a logbook entry, and I can tell you I spent a lot of time on the ground knowing everything there was to know about engine failures or emergencies. I didn't spend enough time thinking about the logbook entry, so the night before I had to make an entry, I stayed up pretty much all night because you really don't want to mess that up. It's going to be looked at for a long time, so I just made sure I did something nice to say in the logbook. I have it at home. I vaguely remember what I said, which I won't try to reconstruct. I do have it at home that I recorded or brought back down. There's also the one last thing I'll mention is there's a code of conduct that was written. Managers and folks on the ground spend a lot of time worrying and fretting over how the chain of command was going to work and how all this was going to work together with all the different nations. The crew members, I would say, didn't really worry about that too much. Most of us are either military background or well-versed in aviation or come from fields where you have hierarchical chains of command. And there's even a description in the Code of Conduct about punishment. It's one of the things I loved about the movie Martian. If you notice, the crew members all stuck together, and that's more typical of what you see. Most of the Hollywood movies, there's arguments and that kind of thing, just to create some tension. But the crew members, I found, I had much more in common with the Russian pilots than I did with American managers or American doctors or certainly American politicians, and vice versa. So, now, don't get me wrong, you do have to write it down, you do have to specify chains of command and how things are going, but the crew members very well understand what's more important is select-in criteria, making sure you hire the right people that do understand the chain of command and how to work with each other and how to increase morale in the long-duration flights and that kind of thing. And the customs and traditions go a long way to help keeping the morale high and keeping teamwork and working together.
Well, I had a chance to read through some of Bill Shepard's log for Expedition 1. I'm going to say one of my favorite entries is about him searching desperately through each of the cabinets and then lamenting in the log, we have to have more coffee up here. So Franklin, you set a record with the flying 7 times, and on your 7th flight you went to the ISS. The space shuttle missions have often been described as a sprint, with and expedition missions being a marathon. How did building the space station and then now crewing it change how we approach spaceflight and how we look at spaceflight, especially in terms of long duration missions?
Well, let me give you my sort of perspective on this space station. Not from the perspective of the 20 years, but the 20 years before the 20 years. There was a lot of dynamics that sort of evolved into what ultimately became the space station. To me, the most remarkable thing that comes out of all of this is how this amazing, engineering project came together, with all these countries involved, and all the pieces sort of fitted together rather well. I mean, there was hardly any problems. And there were some problems, but there was hardly any glitch that would become a showstopper. And the space station historically, sort of languished in Congress for many years, and it just came very close to being canceled. And it was not until the decision was made to turn it into an international, truly international project that it really came together. And what's even more remarkable is that after this decision was made, that all these countries were able to really organize themselves and develop the necessary protocols to make sure all these pieces were built correctly, to the right specs, and that everything would fit together. So to me, this is an accomplishment that is maybe even technically speaking even more remarkable than the Apollo landing on the moon. In terms of the sheer technology integration and the multinational aspects of it. We, as a shuttle person, we started making the shuttle go longer and longer, and eventually we came to realize that you need to have a place to shuttle to, that there was a need to have a space station. And we decided to work with what used to be our enemies. And I have to say that back in the 1980s, when we started in the program, speaking of doing joint missions with the then Soviet Union was heresy. We wouldn't consider that. And there was a lot of people who pushed and persisted and continued to work this. And I know a lot of the older astronauts who started to move and establish the connections with the Russians, and eventually we flew STS-60, which was the precursor to the joint Mir program. I had the opportunity to fly on that flight. And that's when I met Sergei Krikalev. But the first mission, the first meetings we had in Moscow in the winter were as cold inside the room as it was outside. And I'm talking figuratively. The people basically said, there's no reason why you should be here, and we don't want to be here, and we don't want to do this, but we have to do it. And here we are. Amazing that it turned out to be how it turned out to be. So I think there's a lesson there to be had, that how in the end the right solution came out, and we do have a space station, and it's a remarkable success. Nobody can deny that, and it shows that the future of humans in space is international. There's no arguing about that. So that would be my take as a shuttle astronaut.
Great. I've heard that assembling the International Space Station was like assembling a jigsaw puzzle, where each piece is made by a different company, and you try to piece it together at using chopsticks. Nicole, we've just talked about the assembly of the station and reaching that agreement, the international agreements. You were on the first crew to have 6 people on board. For those who are not aware, the space station started with 3 people, dropped down to 2 people for a while, and then increased back up to 6, and now we fluctuate between 6 and 5 on board, and eventually we'll get to 7 with the introduction of commercial crew. But having 6 people on board allowed for a greater focus on the utilization and reaching the actual purpose of the space station to serve as an orbital science platform. Can you talk a little bit about using the space station as a laboratory, as well as what the focus, for those who may not be familiar, what the focus of all that research is.
Yeah, and what I'd like to do is follow on to a little bit of what Franklin said, just because I think it'll lead nicely into the 6-person international crew and what we're doing up there and why. You know, I look at what we've done on the space station and the international partnership that's there, that as long as my 16-year-old son has been alive, we've had people living in space, like you mentioned, and this idea that it started out really, there was contention over even doing this, right? You know, Franklin's describing in a room with the people you're supposed to be doing with it, you're both looking at each other like, why are we here to do this, but we're gonna do it because we need to do it. And we built this place in space that, in a large part, it's this life support system, you know, this mechanical, technological life support system. And we have peacefully and successfully operated there for, you know, almost 20 years. And I think, you know, and I guess in honor of Bucky Fuller, would go back to, you know, this idea of spaceship Earth, and that at some point we all have to acknowledge that we're crew here and operate like we do on the space station. To me, it is the best model for how we could be living and working peacefully and successfully here on Earth. And I think maybe we're still at that point, we're at the table in contention about do we do this or not, but we will get to that point, I believe, where we say, okay, we have to do this, and then it's just a matter of scale to make us live and work peacefully here on spaceship Earth. But that, I think about being part of this 6-person crew that was on board station, and Soichi, sorry, at that point in time, Koichi had already left, so there was no Japanese rep there. But one of the things that sticks out to me on that mission was when we did the track and capture of HTV-1. So the first Japanese cargo vehicle, HTV-1, comes up to the station. It was going to be the first free flyer vehicle that we were going to, reach out and grab with the robotic arm. And I had the honor, the privilege, the weight on, I feel like after that happened, I was like, this weight got lifted off my shoulders. But we were going to fly the arm a lot more aggressively than we ever did for a fixed, piece of hardware to pull it out of the shuttle or off the station. And so we had these 6 crew members on board. So I was a US crew member flying the arm to grapple this Japanese cargo vehicle. We had the first European commander on the station, Frank Davina, who was working all the comm for the operation. We had Canadian astronaut Bob Thirst was on the procedures, and Mike Barrett and Gennady and Roman Romanenko there, and it was so cool. And Frank summed it up after we did this. He's like, how amazing, how wonderful is it that we're these 6 people on board this space station in space. We just grabbed this Japanese vehicle, American bow, a Canadian arm, blah, 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 and I went through this whole thing of how all of that just came together in this one operation. It was wonderful. And of course, there was a lot of bowing in the control center in Japan after we successfully did it, but that was fun. But the other thing, I think, is that all of those people there have decided that we're there together doing something. It's just a greater mission. And ultimately, everything that we're doing, whether it's the way we built the station, how we're living off the grid like no place else and collecting all of our energy from the sun, and the technology that goes into doing that, the science that we're doing on board, everything about it is about improving life here on Earth. And I don't think there's many other places you can go where you find that as absolutely the ultimate goal of everything you're doing. And so I see our future, like was mentioned too, just continues to be even more and more incredible in the way we can live and work together both off our planet and on our planet because of what we're doing on the International Space Station.
Great. Soichi, you're going to be going back to the space station after a decade since being there last. We're talking about it as an anniversary and as history, but it's still a very active space station with potentially another decade to it. Can you talk a little bit about how the preparation for this upcoming mission differs from your first flight, your first long duration flight there. Yeah.
It differs because he's going to pack us all in his bags.
All right, yeah. First of all, I'm very honored and humbled to join this the panel with all those legendary astronauts. I think the reason I'm allowed to be here is three things. First of all, originally come from the wild east. so suitable to stay 6 months in outpost in the space station. The second reason was I was fortunate enough to witness the first launch 20 years ago. November the 20th, 1998, I was at the Baikonur. So I was watched the Zarya go up. It was a cold morning. The launch was successful. The most surprising thing is 30 seconds after the launch, Russian delegation started drinking vodka. And the third reason I was allowed to be here is that I was fortunate enough to go back to space station next year. And this time, first time was in the space shuttle, Discovery, return to flight. Second time was a Soyuz from Baikonur. Next year will be SpaceX. And this is my Expedition 61, the official training mission I got last week. So half of the first. And you're right, this is the first flight, even after a decade. My last flight was 2010. And Nicole was almost at the same time. And my first time was, Wex was still like the chief of the office. I still remember I was asking, and the Wex says, whoever not have a guts to try the long duration, you are not astronaut. And I still hear my words, so that's why I'm trying the third flight. And I'm still going through the third training cycle. What impressed me is that the space station is just keep changing. 10 years ago, that Nicole and I spent 6 months, we are talking about about 10 hours per week for the utilization. And when we talk about 20 hours per week, we are almost hitting the border. But now we're talking about 70 hours per week. So we are very heavily weighted for the utilization. We're maximizing the use of the space station. And the other thing is we are expanding. Last month, in September, I spent a whole month in Russia, Star City. And now we have UAE, Arabian, and they are now joining us for the training. And it is still unofficial, but the Indians are now joining us. We have a couple of candidates training with us. So space station, after 20 years, what's surprising me is it just keeps changing. And that's what makes the space station program so successful, because it's keep evolving. So I'm very happy to go back to space station next year, and I'm confident we're going to continue to evolve for the coming years until we have an exploration program coming to. Thank you.
Great. Well, I had a wrap-up question, but I'm going to pause that because we're running a little long, and ask if any of you have a question that you'd like to ask the panel. Well,
I'm one of those people who always believes that the space station has been a wonderful project, amazing technology for what we've done. But also from the very beginning, I've also had this question. Why does the cost of the space station have been analogous to the way they're shared the benefits of it? The U.S. has paid such a huge amount of that cost. Does anyone have an answer to that? I've never had a chance to ask them.
Well, we can. I got to sit on the right channel now. Because we can, right? I mean, we've got the biggest economy in the world because we can, because this country has the will to go do those things, just like the United States had the will to go to the moon. had the will to put you in Apollo, and you know, and what an amazing thing. And so I would say it's because if we don't do it, no one can do it. I mean, there won't be enough of a driving force to accomplish something with a vision that grand. I would call it world leadership. That's a, you know, the sad thing is that's a political question. We're not politicians, right? So.
So we've talked a lot about the international effort, the collaboration. And that really is an incredible paradigm change from going to the moon to beat the Russians and so on and so forth. Well, China is going to the moon and China is doing a space station. Is their desire to collaborate? Is their desire to compete? What do you guys think?
I think operators are always willing to collaborate. It's up to others.
So I'll tell you, you know, you can ask us the political questions, and our answers are probably every bit as good as the ones you can come up with.
I just want to get a small twist because I come from the why East. Yeah, last week we have some space medicine conference in Rice University. We have a Chinese delegation, and believe it or not, they are willing to cooperate. You know, I understand there are a lot of political conflict among the countries. Our central government is a really bad term with China, but they are very willing to cooperate. They want to join the wonderful international relationship led by U.S. And I think in the coming years, China will be a part of it.
So to get on that political thin ice, I mean, if you read the press, who is one of the biggest threats, or one of the biggest actors stealing intellectual property from this country? So so if you know, so how do you deal with that? And how do you convince Washington that we should sort of open the gates and allow a country which we accuse of being bad actors and, you know, being a big threat to cybersecurity, stealing intellectual property, because, you know, by golly, we start cooperating in space, and it will be very hard to protect our intellectual property.
I'm gonna take a question. So what was the neatest experiment you did? That you're like, man, this is a really cool experiment that you really liked. You thought it was like a really positive scientific experiment.
Anyway. I think there were a lot of them, actually. There were, I don't know with you guys and Soichi with what you have to look forward to up there, but I think on any given day there were over 100 active research investigations going on board the space station. And as crew members, you get involved a little bit and a lot with different ones. I think one of the ones that really stood out to me was, and maybe it's not the most impressive of them all, but I think it speaks to being able to have really a state-of-the-art laboratory equipment on board the station. We had this combustion chamber. And, you know, to look inside the US lab or any of the modules, all you see is these white panels and cables everywhere, and it's kind of a mystery what's going on behind all of the panels. But there was this combustion chamber, and every day we were burning some different mix of fuels inside there, and fuels for all different kinds of applications. But, you know, I remember seeing the video from inside of it. You know, you've got this fuel that's burning like a sphere, and the way that you could look at all of the components of the fuel was very different than what you could do down here on Earth. And then you could look at, okay, if I mix it a different way, is it going to pollute less? Is it going to be more effective? I mean, all of these different kinds of things that you could look at and just would almost seem like the most basic science level that that was available. And it was, to me, it was neat that to me said, this is why we are doing things in this microgravity environment. By taking that one factor out of the equation, across all of those 100 or more different research investigations, we're learning new and different things about things that we thought we already knew a lot about. And I think that's pretty impressive, because it all comes back down to Earth, and then we all, you know, in some way are looking at how you get further off the planet as a result of those studies. And so I kind of liked it when there was a simplicity to it, and you could see kind of clearly, like, wow, this is why we're really doing this here, and what it allows us to know about this thing, this fuel, that we can't know down on Earth.
Yeah, Franklin, is there a chance that the concept of passive air will be ever demonstrated on the ISS?
There is a chance, and there always has been a chance. It has been a very long struggle to get that, but talking about the neatest experiment, that would be the neatest experiment. And what it is essentially firing a plasma rocket from the ISS. And we proposed this way back in 2001, when the ISS was just starting. And well, you know, this is the one thing ISS has, is it is a gigantic bureaucracy. It's very, very complicated to, you know, to maneuver and penetrate through all the wicks and all the nooks and crannies of that bureaucracy. So we have not lost hope that we would do it. There's people that argue that we don't have enough power to drive such an engine, which is a very weak argument, because we were going to use a battery. Essentially, we're going to charge a battery and fire it, you know, with battery pack. But if we were to do that experiment, you would be able to see it from the ground. At night, we would light up the sky. It would be a pretty compelling thing to see. But maybe someday, but right now we're considering that, and also considering a free flyer as the potential demonstration. So we were not giving up on the ISS, but we are considering that more likely to be on a free flyer.
So I'm not sure if my question is political or technical. It depends on the answer. So at what point, it was mentioned that we think we could get 10 more years out of the ISS. At what point, what is the turning point? When are you going to use it till it breaks, or is there some sort of political agreement that has to be made in order for it to officially retire? Oh, I didn't think that was that hard. Sounds must be political.
So it's a combination of things. You know, NASA's funded year by year, so every year it needs to be funded by Congress. So that's one answer. And right now, they've actually agreed to say we will fund it through at least 2024. There is certainly, at some point, a technical and operational lifetime, but I think everything that we've looked at to date shows it could last at least until 2028, based on everything we know, and they look at things like accumulation of loads, you know, solar arrays and things like that. In the president's budget, I guess it was earlier this year, the proposal was to not federally fund it past 2025, with the hopes that there would be commercial use of the station, or maybe even part of the station, and trying to sort of instigate that move from a federally funded national laboratory into something that was more commercial. So that's a conversation that's happening right now. There's still quite a bit of support in Congress for continuing to fund it, thinking that might be a little early for the transition, but that's the conversation that's going on right now.
And that, I think that's really interesting because there could be, it seems to me there could be some like overlapping kind of combination of that going on. Because you have several companies that are looking at, you know, independent commercial space stations, but every single one of them in some way or another wants to start by attaching themselves to the existing space station and utilizing that platform, you know, to start out with, and then build on or take parts off. And I think that's a really interesting, you know, potential.
Yeah, so if you wanted to commercialize the station and tourism became part of that, even if you had another module attached to it, could you see actually mixing? I know there've been single tours at a time, but large numbers, you know, could that, given the way the station is currently constructed and the operations that have to be, strikes me as a difficult mix. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, I think just the Eclipse load precludes any significant number of additional bodies on board. During its life, it is there have been times in which just to conserve things like like Cedra, that we minimize use of some of those. And so I think again, just the volumetric, just the logistics of having food, air, and water up there certainly would bound that. So you know, what would your business model be? It really would be a pretty expensive little ticket.
I mean, you certainly have to, if you know you're in a closed loop system, and you gotta acknowledge the resources available to you. But I think you're right though, that you know, we've had the spaceflight participants. I was there when Gila Liberté was on board, and it was really pleasant. There was no conflict in, you know, operations or anything with that. But if you start looking at it as a hotel, or you know, or as this is the tourist attraction, while you're trying to do, I think, continue to do science and work like that, I think it would be difficult. That's why we need another one. It's just the space hotel. Bruce, back.
Oh, Bruce. Bruce will be the last
Just
person.
a quick question. You know, Nicole, you brought up something about bringing stuff back. You know, since we lost the space shuttle, we've lost a great capability of bringing science and stuff back. And now we've got SpaceX Crew, or SpaceX Cargo Dragon, that can bring a little bit of stuff back. Are the Boeing Starliner and the SpaceX Crew Dragon going to be able to bring science and stuff back?
Bring any science or stuff back?
Yeah, that's true. Actually, as we speak, now we have a Japanese cargo module, HTV. Nicole got the first the vehicle captured. Now we have number 8, and they are starting to have a returning capability. So the return capsule is there. And you're right, the Crew Dragon as well as the Boeing, they can bring not just us, but bring all the science activities back to space. So the returning capability is back online for sure.
And one of the things that's interesting about that too, which I think it's driven us to in some way, because you can't get everything back anymore. You can't just send every you know, science sample back to be analyzed on the ground anymore, is that we're starting to transition more and more to having things, you know, the complete life cycle of the experiment happen on board the station, and the data get down. So the analysis happens through, you know, some new, you know, analytical method up there, some new piece of technology or hardware that allows the crew to, you know, take that through its life versus sending the sample down to the ground to have it happen, which is kind of a really cool. For a crew member, I mean, I thought that would be just the awesomest thing, is to actually be able to facilitate the full life of the experiment.
That is so true. You know, back in the days, 10 years ago, we drove blood by ourselves like crazy until run dry. And put it to the minus
every output product.
Every morning, yeah. And put it to the minus 80 degrees freezer. But these days, we do in situ analysis. We can do the DNA sequence on board. So we don't have to freeze everything. And all the scientists, I'm not the biologist, but they say once you freeze it to minus 80, you lose a lot of the structure of the cells, so it's not useful unless you do the in situ analysis. That's happening these days. So you're right, we're kind of eliminating the need to bring those science, just get the meat of it, so that's a big change these days.
Well, that's our time, so please join me in thanking our